Hi, I'm Melissa Tubbs. I'm doing my author illustrator presentation over the one and only Theodore Seuss Geisel, who is better known as Dr. Seuss. He is by far my favorite children's writer and illustrator. I love his pictures. I love how he brings things to life in a fun, whimsical way. His imagination is just thrown on these pages, which I think helps children see that they can have silly, fun pictures and imaginations to write, what they have in their mind. Theodore was born on March 2nd, 1994. He was born in Springfield, Massachusetts to pretty well-off parents. Their family had owned a successful brewery for many years, but Prohibition hit and had to be closed down. When he was younger, his father was given an honorary position on the board of parks in Springfield, Massachusetts. So that allowed him to have behind the scenes access to this area of forest and the zoo. And he loved that. He loved going to the zoo with this little sketchbook. Him and his sister, he had one sister, and they would go there with their father or their mother or sometimes by themselves, and he would sketch the animals there and draw them. That was the start of his career as an illustrator. He then graduated and went off to Dartmouth. At that time, when Prohibition hit, they had to close the brewery. His father did some odd jobs, but eventually came to be the head over I think they called him the superintendent of the parks. And so he was over the zoo, which came to help him later in life. But when he went to Dartmouth, he wrote for the paper there, but got in some trouble because Prohibition was going on and he was caught drinking. So he was banned from being able to write for the paper there. That spawned his idea of pen names. And so he would write under various pen names at that time. And he continued it throughout his life. After graduating there, he went on to Oxford, England to study there. While there, he met his first wife, Helen Palmer, who was instrumental in him pursuing being an illustrator, a cartoonist, and stuff like that. She convinced him to drop out. They moved back to the United States together, got married. He had several jobs as in advertising and doing political cartoons. He had one really popular advertising for a pesticide called Flit back then. So he did a lot of those. Well, World War II comes along, and he's too old to be, in the army. And so he joins Frank Capra's Signal Corps, and it was in California. And there they made animated films about the military and the training in the military. And there he also did some political cartoons of, having to do with the war. After the war, he decides to focus on writing children's books. They decide to stay in California, him and his wife. They buy a old observatory lookout in La Jolla, California. So the views there are amazing. And he makes that his office, and they build their house around it. And he lives there the remainder of his life. Even after his first wife passes, he remarries and lives there with her. And him and his first wife never had children. So when he married the second one, she had 2 girls. So he had 2 stepchildren. Helen was instrumental in his success and helped run all of his businesses, and she was an author herself. The first book that he wrote, the See It on Mulberry Street, it was turned down 27 times before his friend decided to publish it. So that goes to show you that you just keep trying and trying and trying. If he wouldn't have kept trying and trying, we wouldn't have his popular books. But it wasn't until he wrote and had published The Cat in the Hat that he saw real success and became a household name. Cat in the Hat came around due to his publisher friend had read an article in the Life magazine talking about how the readers of that day that were being used to teach the school kids to read were boring, and they weren't colorful, they weren't fun and exciting, and that they weren't reading as well as they should, children of that day. And so he said, hey, let's make this book using only these words that were pretty much vocabulary words for 6 and 7-year-olds. So Dr. Seuss said, sure, I'll try that. He was used to doing his own rhymes, his own nonsense words. Well, now he was going to have to use real words and be able to make them in a rhyming style like he has. So it took him about 1.5 years to write it. He struggled trying to get the words to rhyme together and to make, coherent story. He finally said, I'm going to focus and try to find 2 words that go together that I can make a story around. After trying several words that rhymed but couldn't make a good story out of, he came up with The Cat in the Hat, and used only the words, and didn't even use all of the words that were on the list, but the majority of the words that were on the list he used in the book. But you can see the difference between a Dick and Jane book compared to this book. This was published in 1957 was the first time. So the primary books that they used to teach reading, they weren't colorful and fun. Even though there's only, very few colors in here, it was still more colorful. And it was a fun story that made kids want to keep reading till the end to see what happened. But I love his illustrations. I mean, you can look at a picture and instantly know that that is a Dr. Seuss picture. While he was writing, he's been known for using other art forms. When he was doing his books, he mainly used watercolor. He loved watercolor, and he did some oils and acrylics and used some pen work also. But the interesting thing that I didn't know he did, when he wrote To Think I Saw It on Mulberry Street, his father at the time had become the superintendent over the zoo. So he had access to horns and antlers and bills of animals that had died in the zoo. His father would give them to him, and he would make his own taxidermied animals that were in his imagination. So they weren't real, but they were in his imagination. So he would bring them to life, 3D form. And he would use them to try to help and sell his book because they would be characters from his book. I suggest you go look that up, and because now they make replicas of them that you can buy. They're very expensive, but it's very cool. And at times you might be able to find an exhibit of them. but it was a really cool thing to find that I didn't know that he did. He also did sculptures and stuff like that, but for his books, he mainly used watercolor and pen and acrylics and stuff. So he writes this book, and it is such a hit that the publishing company, Random House, puts him in charge and starts a little offshoot, Beginner Books Inc. So growing up, I always remember seeing this little symbol, Beginner Books. Him and his wife ran that, and you know, they edited all the books and only did certain ones that would help children become readers. So a lot of his books from that point have a lot of easy words to read, and they repeat so the child, can learn by saying them over and over, the repetition of it. But I just always love all of his little characters. And he always has his made up animals like this. Like, that's not a real animal, but in his imagination, it was. And children see animals or see people in different ways. And I think it's exciting that they can see that I can draw that and it's okay. It doesn't have to be always realistic. Hop on Pop is a very popular book for beginner readers because, like I said, the words are very repetitive and they're simple. For me, one of my favorites, this holds a special spot in my heart because it was my youngest's favorite book. We would read it over and over and over. Green Eggs and Ham by Dr. Seuss. Sam I Am wants him to try green eggs and ham, and he does not. He won't try them here or there, and he won't try them anywhere. But he does finally try them, and he likes them. But it's an excellent book for teaching kindergartners or even pre-Kers to hear rhyming sounds and to be able to recognize that that word rhymes when you hear it. So that's an excellent source if you're teaching young kids. A lot of the time, some of his books, not a lot of time, a few of the times, his books would have undertones or topics that were an adult topic that he would put in a children's book. One is Yertle the Turtle. I love turtles, so of course that's another. I don't have one favorite Dr. Seuss books. I think I say I do, and then I go, nope, it's this one. But the Lorax is environmentalist. Yertle the Turtle was based on Hitler, because he has the little black there, or the guy that the turtle on top has a little black. The Lorax environmentalism, the Butter Battle book, which is hard to say, which is another one of my favorites. It's a lesser known book of his that he published in the 1980s. It was about the nuclear war arms race that was going on during the Cold War in the 80s. And it's a fun book, do you butter your bread on the top or underneath? It's a fun book. So he always was able to throw little things in there to, make you think. But children aren't thinking that deep usually. They just think they're fun and silly. The Lorax was inspired by his house that they had bought up on in La Jolla when they decided to stay there after the war. They bought the observation station that overlooked the coast, and they built their house around it, and that's where he lived with his first wife and second wife after the first wife passed away. He lived there until he died September 24th, 1991, I believe. But the interesting thing that I found was I did not know the truffula tree, they say, was based on a tree that he could see from his observatory. And when I saw it, I instantly said, oh yes, that looks like a truffula tree. Of course, it's not colorful and stuff, but you can see the billowiness of it and just the roundness and flowingness of it. It's no longer there. I think in maybe 2018, 2019, they took it out. It was, had termite damage and stuff. But I thought that was really interesting. It's a form of a cypress tree. So in the Lorax, like I said, he tackles the topic of environmentalism. And he was tired of seeing all of these billboards and such popping up and ruining his view of La Jolla. So he wrote this, about don't chop down all the trees, and, they don't have tongues and I will speak for them, is what the Lorax does. Another book that is great for young readers, and I think was one of my favorites. I didn't really start reading Dr. Seuss till I was a junior in till I was in junior high school and took a literature class, and they made us read children's books. But it teaches, that you don't always have to be exactly like the other person. Just because they have a star in their belly doesn't mean you have to either. So it's a fun book. But he used several pseudonym names, pen names. Dr. Seuss, of course, was one. Theo Lesage, I'm not sure how to say that, was also one. He used that one when he only wrote the book. When he wrote and illustrated a children's book, it was Dr. Seuss. And he also wrote under the name Rosetta Stone. He wrote over 80 books in total, most of them children's books, and most under the Dr. Seuss name. Most were written or published during his lifetime, but there has been several that were published after he died. So I hope that you love Dr. Seuss as much as I do, and you enjoy his books and enjoy reading them to your children.